I still remember the smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and expensive perfume hanging in the air that Christmas night. My parents' mansion looked like something from a holiday movie. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above a dining table long enough to seat 20 people, and every corner of the house was decorated with gold ornaments and imported decorations. I stood near the entrance holding my newborn son against my chest while trying not to look nervous. Across the room, my father stared at me as if I had dragged a wild animal into his home. The reason wasn't my baby. The reason was the man standing beside me. My boyfriend, Kalen. Technically, he was an alien. Not the scary kind. Not the invading Earth kind. Just a hardworking immigrant from a small colony world who had arrived on Earth 5 years earlier looking for opportunity. Unfortunately, opportunity had mostly given him greasy overalls and a job fixing broken engines. Kalen smiled nervously at my relatives. "I have learned another human holiday tradition," he announced proudly. Everyone looked at him. He held up a wrench. "If the turkey breaks, I can repair it." My little cousin laughed so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. Unfortunately, my parents weren't amused. To them, Kalen wasn't a loving partner. He was an embarrassment. A poor mechanic. A blue-skinned outsider. The father of my child. Dinner had barely started when my mother placed her wine glass on the table with a sharp click. The entire room went silent. My father folded his hands. "We need to discuss your future." I knew that tone. Nothing good ever followed it. My mother glanced at my son and sighed dramatically. "You are still young. There are options." I tightened my grip on the baby. "What options?" She exchanged a look with my father. Then he said the words that changed my life forever. "Give the child up." For a moment I thought I had heard him wrong. "What?" "Give him to a family that can provide a proper life," my father said calmly. "Then end this relationship and come home." The room became completely silent. I stared at him. Then at my mother. Neither of them looked ashamed. They looked serious. My mother leaned forward. "We can fix this mistake." Mistake. She was talking about my son. Kalen's face went pale. "I may not be rich," he said quietly, "but I love them." My father laughed. "Love doesn't pay bills." Kalen looked ready to argue, but I could already see the pain in his eyes. For years he had worked 16-hour days repairing vehicles. For years he had treated me with kindness. For years he had done everything possible to build a future for us. And now my parents were acting as if he were worthless. My mother delivered the final blow. "If you keep the baby, you're no longer part of this family." Several relatives looked uncomfortable. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. I looked down at my sleeping son. Then I looked at Kalen. The answer was obvious. I stood up. "If that's the choice, then I choose my son." My mother's jaw dropped. My father's face darkened. "Think carefully." "I already have." "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No. You will." A few minutes later, we walked out into the cold Christmas night carrying everything we owned. Our transportation was Kalen's ancient pickup truck, which rattled like it was losing a fight with gravity. When he started the engine, smoke immediately poured from the exhaust. "Good news," he said. "What?" "The truck only sounds expensive to repair." I laughed despite the tears running down my face. We drove away from the mansion while snow fell around us. That Christmas dinner cost me my family. Later that night, we sat in the truck sharing gas station sandwiches while our newborn slept peacefully beside us. Kalen wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I looked at the tiny baby in my arms and then at the man who loved us more than anything. For the first time all evening I smiled. "Don't be." My parents thought they had thrown away their biggest embarrassment that night. They had no idea they had just thrown away their future. The first few years after that Christmas were brutally difficult. There were weeks when Kalen and I counted coins just to buy groceries. Our first apartment was so small that if one person opened the refrigerator, the other had to move out of the way. During winter, the heater worked only when it felt emotionally prepared for the responsibility. Still, somehow we were happy. Our son grew up surrounded by laughter instead of luxury. Kalen worked harder than anyone I had ever met. He spent his days repairing engines and his nights studying vehicle systems. Being from another world gave him a unique perspective on technology, but Earth machinery constantly confused him. One afternoon he came home looking excited. "I improved a customer's car." I smiled. "That's great. It now uses 20% less fuel." I blinked. "How?" He shrugged. "I removed 3 unnecessary parts." A week later the customer returned with 6 engineers and a government inspector asking how he had done it. That became a regular occurrence. Kalen would casually solve problems that experts had spent years struggling with. To him, they were obvious. To everyone else, they were revolutionary. The funniest part was that he never understood why people were impressed. One day I found him studying Earth traffic laws. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Trying to understand why humans put speed suggestions on road signs." I stared at him. "They aren't suggestions." His eyes widened. "Oh. That explains several speeding tickets." While Kalen worked on engineering innovations, I focused on business operations. I handled customers, finances, contracts, and every challenge that came with running a growing company. Slowly, our little repair shop expanded. Then expanded again. Then again. Within a decade we owned multiple service centers. A few years later we started manufacturing automotive components. The business exploded. Investors appeared. Partnerships followed. New facilities opened across the country. The same people who once ignored us now wanted meetings. The same social circles that had mocked Kalen suddenly called him a visionary. He hated being called that. "I accidentally fixed things," he always insisted. Meanwhile our son grew into an incredible young man. He inherited my determination and his father's kindness. Unlike many children raised around wealth, he never became entitled. He remembered our humble beginnings. He remembered helping clean workshops after school. He remembered family dinners where everyone sat together laughing about ridiculous mistakes. One of his favorite stories involved the old pickup truck that nearly fell apart every week. According to family legend, more replacement parts had been installed than original parts remained. "It wasn't a truck," our son would joke. "It was a collection of spare parts united by optimism." Even after our company became one of the largest automotive manufacturers in the industry, those moments never changed. Money made life easier. It didn't make life better. Love had already done that. The only thing missing was my parents. 20 years passed without a phone call. No birthday cards. No holiday messages. Nothing. At first the silence hurt. Eventually it became normal. I stopped waiting. I stopped hoping. I focused on the family I had built instead of the one I had lost. Ironically, while we were creating a future from hard work, loyalty, and love, my parents were busy protecting a reputation nobody cared about anymore. And while they spent 20 years guarding their social status, our family spent 20 years building something far more valuable. Neither of us realized that fate was quietly preparing the most ironic Christmas reunion imaginable. 20 years after that disastrous Christmas dinner, life had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Our company had grown into one of the largest automotive businesses in the country. We manufactured advanced vehicle systems, owned research facilities, and employed thousands of people. The little repair shop that started with a leaking roof and borrowed tools had become an empire. Meanwhile, my parents' world was moving in the opposite direction. I didn't know all the details at first. The news reached me through business circles. Several bad investments. A few arrogant decisions. Trusting the wrong people. Trying to maintain an expensive lifestyle long after the money started disappearing. One mistake became another. Then another. Within a few years, much of their fortune had vanished. Ironically, the mansion they had loved more than their own daughter became one of their biggest financial burdens. Maintaining the enormous estate cost a fortune. Eventually they had no choice. The property was quietly placed on the market. I probably would never have known if fate hadn't decided to play one of its favorite jokes. The joke arrived in the form of my son. One evening he burst into our dining room carrying a tablet. "You guys have to see this." Kalen looked up from a vehicle design. "Is it another video of humans attempting parallel parking?" "No. That's disappointing." Our son ignored him. "I found the perfect property." He placed the tablet on the table. The moment I saw the photos, my heart nearly stopped. The mansion. My parents' mansion. The same house where I had been disowned 20 years earlier. The same house where they had demanded I choose between my child and my family. My son smiled. "It's beautiful, right?" I exchanged a glance with Kalen. Neither of us said a word. Our son continued talking excitedly. "It has enough room for Christmas parties, community events, employee gatherings, everything." He had absolutely no idea. To him it was simply a gorgeous historic property. A few weeks later the purchase was finalized. The mansion officially belonged to him. Neither my parents nor my son knew the connection. I almost told him. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see how this strange twist of fate would unfold. Then Christmas approached. Naturally, my son decided to host the biggest holiday celebration our family had ever seen. Hundreds of invitations went out. Friends, employees, neighbors, business partners, community leaders, and, surprisingly, the former owners of the property. When I asked why, he shrugged. They seemed to be going through a difficult time. Nobody should spend Christmas alone. Kalen nearly choked on his coffee. The irony was becoming impossible to ignore. Christmas evening finally arrived. The mansion was decorated with lights and decorations far more beautiful than I remembered. Guests filled every room. Music played. People laughed. Children ran through hallways. Then the front doors opened. My parents walked inside. For a moment they looked confused. Then they saw me. The color drained from my mother's face. My father froze so completely that he looked like a statue. Neither of them had expected this. Neither of them knew I would be there. Before they could recover, my son approached them with a warm smile. "Welcome! I'm so glad you came." My parents stared at him. My mother looked from him to me and back again. Slowly realization began spreading across her face. My father looked like a man trying to solve a math problem during an earthquake. Then Kalen appeared carrying a tray of food. "Good evening," he said cheerfully. My father's jaw nearly hit the floor. The mechanic he had once mocked now owned companies worth billions. The awkward alien he had dismissed was now one of the most respected engineers in the industry. The expression on his face was priceless. It only got better. Because a few minutes later, my son stood near the Christmas tree, raised a glass, smiled at everyone, and delivered the sentence that changed my parents' expressions forever. My son raised his glass and smiled at the crowd gathered inside the mansion. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight." The room quieted. Christmas lights reflected from the enormous windows while guests turned their attention toward him. He looked completely relaxed. My parents looked like they were preparing for a medical emergency. "This house has a long history," my son continued. "And I believe people matter more than property." Several guests nodded. Then he delivered the sentence that shattered the last bit of composure my parents had left. "That's why I've invited the former owners to stay in our guest house for as long as they need." Silence. Absolute silence. My mother's mouth fell open. My father blinked several times as if his brain had stopped working. The mansion they once ruled no longer belonged to them. Their grandson owned it. And they were now being offered accommodation in the guest house. The irony was so powerful that even I almost laughed. My son continued smiling. "I know starting over can be difficult, especially at their age. Family and community should help each other." The poor man still had no idea he was talking about the same grandparents who had demanded his adoption 20 years earlier. Several guests applauded. My father looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Kaylin leaned toward me and whispered, "Should we tell him now or after dessert?" I nearly choked on my drink. Throughout dinner, the comedy only intensified. My parents kept trying to understand how everything had happened. Everywhere they looked, they saw reminders of what they had lost. Employees spoke proudly about our company. Community leaders praised our charitable programs. Friends told stories about Kaylin's inventions. One guest even called him a genius. Kaylin immediately corrected him. "I once spent 3 hours trying to repair a coffee machine before discovering it wasn't plugged in." The room erupted with laughter. Even my father accidentally laughed before catching himself. As dinner continued, my son stood and shared a toast. He spoke about perseverance, about family, about love. Then he began telling the story of how his parents built a business from almost nothing. He talked about late nights in repair shops, about sacrifice, about determination, about two people who refused to quit when life became difficult. As I listened, I noticed tears forming in my mother's eyes. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't looking at me with disappointment. She was looking at me with regret. After dinner, my parents finally approached us. They looked older than I remembered. Smaller somehow. Not because of age. Because life had humbled them. My father struggled to find words. The man who once controlled every conversation suddenly couldn't complete a sentence. Finally, my mother spoke. "We were wrong." The words came out quietly. Painfully. "We thought money was everything." I said nothing. She wiped her eyes. "And we lost 20 years because of it." My father nodded. "We hurt you. We hurt all of you." For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Kaylin broke the tension. "To be fair, if you hadn't disowned us, I might never have worked hard enough to become successful." My father looked hopeful. "Really?" "No," Kaylin replied. "I was going to do that anyway." The look on my father's face caused everyone nearby to laugh. Even my mother couldn't help smiling. Eventually I accepted their apology. Not because the past had disappeared. Not because the pain was gone. But because carrying anger for 20 years seemed like an exhausting hobby. Later that evening, my son finally learned the truth. His reaction was surprisingly calm. After hearing the entire story, he simply looked at his grandparents and said, "Well, that's awkward." The room exploded with laughter. Months later, my parents moved into the guest house. My father now had a habit of asking permission before making changes to the property. One morning he asked my son if he could park his car beside the garage. My son thought about it seriously. "That'll cost you." My father sighed. "How much?" "1 Christmas cookie per month." My father agreed immediately. And just like that, the mansion that had once torn a family apart became the place that brought everyone back together. 20 years earlier, my parents had forced me to choose between family and love. I chose love. I chose my son. I chose the broke alien mechanic who stood beside me when nobody else would. In the end, love built an empire. Love created a future. And love turned my parents' mansion into my son's house.